Hi, I'm Melinda from Bellflower, California, and you're listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, a podcast where two Midwestern moms talk progressive politics and political activism with expert guests.
Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm here tonight with my co-host Sophy. Hey Sophy.
Hey Kelly.
And we also have with us Lou Markert, who is a founding member of Gays Against Guns New York. Hi Lou.
Hi Kelly. Hey Sophy. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be speaking with both of you.
Could you start by telling us what is Gays Against Guns and how did it start?
Gays Against Guns is an inclusive direct action group of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, and allies who are committed to nonviolently breaking the gun industry's chain of death. Chain of death being investors, manufacturers, the gun lobby like the NRA, and the politicians who block safer gun laws. We began about a week or so after the shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, and it just kind of happened spontaneously. There was, as I'm sure you can imagine, there was kind of this just unbelievable, just outpouring of rage after this happened. I had been in touch with an activist named Cathy Marino Thomas, who had been very involved in marriage equality in New York State. She was on the executive committee of Marriage Equality, New York. And I kind of got in touch with her and she said, we're going to do something. And I said, great, let me know. Shortly thereafter, she said, hey, some guys are getting together at the Gay and Lesbian Center. You want to go? And I said, yes. And we got there and there was a huge contingent of people there ready to do something. And initially, Gays Against Guns was just our first and really the only thing we thought of doing initially was getting into the Pride March and making a statement as big and as broad as we could. And then it just kept going. Subsequently, we became the first kind of gun violence prevention group to get arrested in the Senate office building in Washington, D.C., and that was the day following the Sutherland Springs, Texas shooting. The second time we got arrested was only a few hours before the Parkland shooting happened. So we've been active for now 2 years. It'll be 2 years in a few weeks. And we continue to be just outraged and angry at what's happening in our country.
What is your personal history with activism and politics? Is this something that you have been working on for a long time? Is this something that was new to you with this project?
Well, I'll tell you, I came into activism. I consider myself more of a citizen than I do an activist, but it's kind of undeniable that I'm an activist. There are levels, right? There are people in Gays Against Guns, people like Cathy Marino Thomas, people who really just work and work and work. And we all do. But my initial entry into activism started with marriage equality. And I'd been involved in a binational relationship. And as a Caucasian, cisgendered male, I thought I understood the plight of disadvantaged people, but I'd never personally bumped up against anything until I realized that there were laws that were stopping me from sponsoring somebody for immigration. And it was at that point that kind of scales fell from my eyes and I began to look at the world in a different way. It was after the shooting in Newtown that I kind of lost my mind about gun control. And I started to see it in a way that just I found, growing up gay during the AIDS crisis had an impact, undoubtedly. And then marriage equality was also an eye-opener. And one of the things that always irritated me, and I didn't quite understand it fully until the Newtown shooting, was this, how do I put it? There was always an effort to dismiss gay people, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, as somehow corruptive to society, corrosive or dangerous. And there would always be these people that said, we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to have children hear that. What about the children? There was always this kind of perception that we were somehow unclean. And then the shooting happened, and these 20 lovely babies were mowed down in the most unbelievable massacre. And just a few months later, the Congress of the United States, in full view of the people the survivors and the parents of those children, in full view of them who were sitting in the gallery, decided to stop even the most superficial gun safety laws from passing into federal law. It was at that point that I started going, my country has gone insane. I started to do social media postings, and I started to do the same kind of talking that I'd done about marriage equality. And I started to do the kind of research that I did about marriage equality. And the more I did, the more unbelievable it became to me. And when Pulse happened, and there were plenty of shootings between the time that Newtown happened and Pulse happened. But when Pulse happened, I thought to myself, that is it. Any free time I have, I'm dedicating to this. And it's because any shooting subsequent to Newtown, subsequent to Columbine, in my view, was a criminal act by the legislators in our country. And it was something that was tantamount to treason. So, there's in this world we live in, there's a lot of talk about intersectionalities, right? A lot of, highly educated, kind of elitist or effete people will use it kind of as a cocktail party talk. But there's a reality to intersectionality in this business. I recently wrote an article. It's the only article I've ever written for publication. It's the only article I've ever written that's in the 2018 Boston Pride Guide called Staring Down the Barrel. And it's really about the ways that the thing that irritates me about the gun violence issue is that as gay people, we have seen this all before. Okay? The CDC has been muzzled. The CDC's been muzzled for studying gun violence, by the way, by the Dickey Amendment for a long time. It's 1,000 different ways the gun lobby has stopped reasonable, rational approaches to solving this crisis. And they did the same thing with HIV. They muzzled the CDC. They specifically unfunded the CDC when it came to AIDS. You had doctors and researchers who had to beg, borrow, and steal equipment, spaces, and people to study AIDS. And it's the same nonsense they're doing with the Dickey Amendment on gun violence. It's mind-boggling. There was that saying about, this red state, blue state mentality, whether or not you agree with it or not. There was always this concept of guns, gays, and God. In a lot of ways, that's very true. Because the treatment of gun violence in this country and the treatment of gays as a political issue, as a way to consolidate and maintain political power, the methods they're using are almost identical. Fear, hate, and loathing, and machismo. And the thing that irritates me, the thing that's unconscionable about this is that people fall for it over and over and over and over again. I said to somebody after the election of Donald Trump, I said, look, I woke up after the Newtown shooting, after the Senate of the United States voted down the most mundane gun safety measures, and Barack Obama, the president of the United States, came out and cried in frustration at a podium. I remember watching that and thinking to myself, the revolution has happened, and I have lost.
So you talked about the methods that the chain of death has used, and that this in many ways is similar to the kinds of methods that were used to stifle research and money into the HIV epidemic. So what are the methods that you are using, that Gays Against Guns is using, to try to break that cycle?
Well, there are a couple of things. First, one of the more recent things we did is we staged a 26-hour protest in front of a 24-hour FedEx headquarters in New York City. For example, Federal Express was part of and still remains part of a business alliance that And this was recently in the news after Parkland. There was this business alliance that the National Rifle Association had with a bunch of vendors like Hertz Rent-A-Car and Wyndham Hotels and FedEx that offered incredibly steep discounts to their business partners. And we had picketed about a year and a half ago out in front of Wyndham, out in front of FedEx and Hertz in an effort to just call attention to the fact that vendors that people are using are basically making blood money off of this business alliance with the NRA. After the shooting in Parkland and after the heat and light that had been shed upon this, these guys started to leave. These companies started to leave the business alliance. And then you had places like Dick's Sporting Goods that started to change their policies on carrying weapons and ammunition. But FedEx still remains a provider of discounted services to the NRA. And more importantly, you can ship guns through FedEx across the country for a discount, which is insane. So that's one of the members of the chain of death, the vendors that provide the discounts. We've also gone around and we've picketed from the very beginning. We've gone after certain politicians. One of the most successful, I think, was Kelly Ayotte. We went up and picketed in front of her office about 3 or 4 weeks, I think, before the election. She was one of the senators, by the way, who voted against the mundane gun control laws that happened after the Newtown massacre. She is no longer a member of the legislature in the United States. She's out. And I'm very happy about that. There are others like John Basso and others who are kind of problematic people that we want to call attention to their policies in an effort to get them to change. What we did down in Washington, D.C., just a few hours before the Parkland shooting, as it would happen, was we went and we delivered it. This was, by the way, if you remember, this was on Valentine's Day. We went and we delivered a bloody Valentine to Senator John Cornyn of Texas, who is somebody who's been sponsoring this bill called reciprocity, which, by the way, it's another technique to confuse you or bore you. Reciprocity means guns everywhere. Anyway, we went down with our road show, and we have kind of street theater that we do. We had a drag queen kind of dressed up like Donald Trump, and she was being courted by the NRA, and we did performance work before we went in and delivered the Bloody Valentine to Senator John Cornyn in his office. And then shortly thereafter, we were arrested and processed and released. We've also gone to gun shows. We have taken teams to go down to gun shows primarily in Pennsylvania. That's where I'm from originally, outside of Philadelphia. We went down to gun shows in areas in kind of upstate Pennsylvania, Allentown, the Poconos, not to be confrontational, but to be present and to offer them information about the dangers of simply possessing a firearm. So we've tried to take it everywhere. We've done it through naming, blaming, and shaming politicians. We've done it by demonstrating in front of vendors and, the people who accept money or facilitate, provide benefits enjoyed by members of the NRA. And we've taken it to the gun owners. So we try to do it in many ways as possible to just let people know you're more likely to kill yourself or kill a member of your family than kill an intruder when you possess a weapon. And it's important to remember that of the 38 or so thousand deaths every year by gun violence, that 2/3 of them are suicides. I've spoken to people about this, and they say to me, well, I have the right to kill myself. And I say to them, look, this isn't about your right to die. This is about congressionally assisted suicide. This is about somebody's one fleeting moment of despair being the last feeling they ever have. And because gay people and lesbian people and bisexual people, transgender people are overrepresented even now with the gains that we've made, it's so difficult for people to live openly that we're overrepresented in the number of suicides.